Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cypher Guide series. Bind is finally back in the rotation and it's going to be a really strong map for Cypher. But for those of you guys who haven't seen these series before, this guide is going to cover first round buys, defense setups for both A and B, as well as how to attack on both of those sites. But without further ado, let's get into it. So for first round buys on attack, I recommend always doing just a default buy of a tripwire and a cage, as well as a ghost or a frenzy. It's up to you, since you really have to just make space and you don't really know what fights you're going to have to get into. So having one of these two guns can be really helpful. But for defense, I actually recommend a pretty unique buy. I recommend getting all of your util as well as a shorty, since when you guard sites, a lot of the angles you're going to have to be watching are going to be super close, so a shorty can get a lot of value for you. But make sure when you do this, make sure to get a classic at the site just in case they don't go to your site. So both sites with Cypher are actually really strong to watch and defend, and I'm going to show you why. So starting out with the cam, you want to get as close as you can into this corner. And then you want to just jump throw until you get a cam like this. So this cam is going to be perfect for the setup you're going to be doing for this. So it allows you to see a little bit into when they're pushing short, as well as you can see all the way into bath, which is exactly the info you're going to need for this one-way and setup. So starting out the actual one-way part of this setup, you want to get into this corner all the way as far as you can. And aim your crosshair. If you see this like little line one right here, you want to go at the corner, like when it starts curving, and throw. And you'll have a cage that lands up there. You want to pair it up with the trip that's right in front like this. It's pretty hard to break from the enemy's point of view. They can break it, but it's a bit harder to break. And you want to pair this up with a trip on short so you can watch both sides. Like that. And then you want to throw a cage right on this little square right here in the middle. So the way this setup actually works, if you notice they're pushing short first, you activate this cage and kill the person who hits your trip. If you notice that they're pushing showers first or bath, or you could play off a trip contact as well, you activate the cage and you have a really nice one-way for bath. My second setup on A site is dedicated to specifically watching short. So if the cam you want to do is you want to go onto this box right here and throw your cam on top of this little like whatever this is, and it allows you to see pretty deep into short, and it gives you all the info you're going to be needing to know how to activate and use your util. So the way this setup works, you want to first off throw the same tripwire you did before, just a little bit further down just so it lands on the stairs instead of the box. And then you want to pair this up with another trip against this corner like this, and throw a cage here as well as on top of here. So one of these cages is going to be a decoy, but the other one's going to be real and where you're going to be shooting from. So when you notice they're actually pushing up short, you activate your cage, both cages, and kill anyone who hits your trips. This next setup actually goes back to the initial cam I showed you, except it's actually going to be placed a little bit different than the other one. So you want to get into this corner as deep as possible, and you want to jump throw and get your cam into this place. And it shows you a little bit into showers, not too much, but shows you more of short this time, which is what you're going to want. So the trip you're going to start off by placing, you can throw a trip into this corner right here, and you have a more like hidden trip than the initial one that was placed in this corner. And you're going to be watching short with this as well. So the second trip you want to place a trip like that, so that when they start pushing up on the site, they'll hit this trip. And you want to throw a cage on top right here, as well as a cage right here. And then the way this setup is played is when you notice they're getting close to your trip short or showers, whichever one they're pushing first. If you think they're pushing short first, you activate this cage, and kill the person who hits your trip, and you're not even open to showers when you do this. And then if you think they're pushing showers first, you activate this cage and kill the person who hits your showers trip. So as I showed before, I showed a setup that specifically was watching short, but now I'm going to show a setup that specifically watches showers. So for the cam, you want to go into this corner right here, and then jump throw on this sign, and you'll get a pretty good cam for watching showers that can be a bit hard to see for the enemies. And then the trips you want to pair up with this, you want to place just a simple trip against this box right here, as well as a trip against this corner like this. And then you want to throw cages around here, like you just want to throw a cage like that, as well as a cage like that, so the enemies don't really know where you're shooting from. And you want to play in this corner right here. So when you notice they're actually pushing up showers, you activate both cages and kill anyone who hits any of your trips. So the final setup I do on Bind A site goes back to one of the old cams, which is this one. And it's more of like a simple setup, just something simple to do if you want to dedicate more to your aim over your setups. So you start off with just placing a trip in this corner right here, and you have a pretty good trip for watching showers. And then you want to place another trip against this corner right here, and you can just throw cages on top of both of them. And the reason this is so much more like aim oriented is because these trips are very simple and they might get broken out, but they're very good for info and can tell you when the enemies are actually pushing up, just in case like your cam gets broken or you don't happen to be on that site at the moment. It just helps out for giving info and helps you dedicate more of your aim over your setups. While Cypher is strong on both A site and B site, I will say this, B site is a lot more fun for Cypher, and I'm going to show you why with my favorite setup right away. So starting out with the cam, you want to jump throw up here, and you'll get a cam that can see for when they're entering hookah, as well as when they're pushing up long. So you want to start off by placing a trip in long. This is just going to be an info trip. You're actually not going to be watching this, but it's just going to tell you when they're pushing up. And then just throw a cage on top of it. And then for the one-way part of this, you want to get into this corner as deep as possible, and then aim your crosshair in the middle of this line. For the trip you're going to be using to tell you when to activate the cage, you want to throw a tripwire against this thing right here, and you're going to be playing into this corner, right here, as far as possible into the corner. So the way this works, when you notice they're pushing up long, you can just try to delay them as long as possible. You do not want to get pushed from long as possible. But when you notice they're actually pushing up hookah, you want to activate this cage. And you have a really amazing one-way for hookah. So on B site, the sand actually gives you a lot of places to place down your trips. But before I get to that, I'm going to show you guys the cam I'm placing for this setup. So you want to get on this box right here, and then you want to place a cam something like this. This cam will give you info for when they're actually pushing up long, as well as when they're pushing out of hookah, which is great info and tells you when they're pushing up in both scenarios. So the trips themselves though, you want to place a trip on the corner like this, and it'll give you a really great trip for when they're pushing up long. It's almost inevitable they'll run into it from long or break it. But they also have a possibility of running into it from hookah as well. But the second trip you want to pair up with that, if they're pushing hookah, there's a chance that they're going to miss that trip. So you want to place a trip something like this. But you're going to be playing this setup from elbow, so you're going to throw a cage there as well. And the way this setup works is when you notice they're pushing out from either side, you activate this cage and kill anyone who hits your trips. while the last two setups were really fun, this one is also really fun, but for a different reason. So you're gonna do the same cam as before. This one. But while you're up here, you also want to throw a cage in this corner. And you'll see why in a second. And then you want to, the trips you actually want to place though, you want to place a trip like that. As well as a trip like this. And then you want to throw a cage deeper in, or not as deep in to elbow, but you're going to be playing in the same spot. And then the way this works, you'll see why this cage was placed in a sec. So when you notice they're pushing up long or hookah about to hit your trips, you activate this cage first and kill anyone who hits your trips. But before this cage falls, you actually want to activate the other one and go into this corner right here for a bit of an unexpected play. So this setup I'm going to showcase is actually not really recommended by me, since it actually gives the enemies a lot of space before they actually run into your util. So only do this if your other setups don't really work. But for the cam, you're actually going to do a different cam as before. You're going to get into this corner as close as you can without falling. And place a cam on the solar panel like that. And you have a cam that can see when they're actually peeking long, as well as all of sight itself. It's pretty visible from long, so it will probably get broken if they go long. But it's also already info as well as watching sight, so it's a really great cam. The trips you want to place is a trip against this corner like this, as well as another trip in the other corner. And then throwing trips in front of both of them. You're going to play this in tube, and the way this works is when you notice they're pushing close to your trips, you activate both the cages, and then you can actually wall bang through this and kill anyone who hits your trips without putting yourself in any danger. So my last setup on B site is actually a full hookah guard. So for the cam, you want to get into this corner as close as you can without falling. Or you want to actually go like around here and throw the cam. So this cam, it seems weak initially, but the good thing about this, you'll almost always see them before they see the cam, which is exactly what you need for this setup. The first trip you want to pair up with this, you want to place a trip like this so that it isn't really breakable. The only way they can do this or get past this is by jumping past it or hitting it, which is exactly what you need. You want to throw a cage on top of that, and then the trip you want to pair up with that is a trip in this vase. I don't really know if it's bugged or not, but they can't really break it from this side, so that's good. And then you want to throw a cage on top like that. So this setup is actually played in a bit of a unique way. You're going to get info off of your cam, they'll probably break it after. But once you notice when they're actually pushing up into hookah, you activate this first cage and kill anyone who hits that trip. But instead of actually leaving like most of the time you would leave, you would instead activate the second cage when they start pushing up more and kill anyone who hits that second trip. And you'll have a free exit after from hookah. So when attacking A site, there's only one trip that really actually works for flank, and it's a trip in this corner like this. The good part about this is it's pretty hard to break. It's not even breakable from this side. They would have to break it from this side, which would make them look away. So if someone happens to be watching this trip, it'll make it really easy for that person. But when you actually start pushing up on the A site, I usually recommend throwing a cam on top of the teleporter, just so you have info for your team on if anyone's peeking tower with an op maybe, or peeking close anywhere on site. And it's great info at the end of the day. So when you actually start pushing up more into sight, I recommend just throwing a cage in front of U-Haul, just so that your team doesn't have to watch that angle and can just watch the rest of the site just for a couple seconds so that they can actually make space. And then you can push into U-Haul later on in the round. So when attacking B site, there's one trip for flank that you should almost always do, and it's the trip right here. if you want to double up and make sure they don't go like around or anything, you could also place a second trip right here so that you'll get info no matter where they go on if they're actually flanking or not. When you actually start like pushing up into hookah though, there's one thing you should almost always do for your team, and it's you should always cam in there. In hookah, there's a lot of the times like a judge or like a shorty, bucky, or something that you shouldn't push into. So a cam like this can just tell you what your team is getting into, as well as it can see all the way back in hall. But once you actually push on the site, I recommend just the simplest thing to do is almost always just throw a cage into hall, just so that when your team pushes out, hall will not be a problem and will actually just help your team make space in a much easier manner. So this is just a little bonus for like the teleporter. There's actually a one way you can do for all of the teleporters, and the way you do this is you actually get under the teleporter, not all the way, but like close to it, and then aim your crosshair something like that and throw. It's actually really hard to do, but once you get it right, you'll have a cage up there, and when you activate the cage, you have a pretty good one way for the teleporters. Thank you everyone for watching this video. With new bind coming out, you know I had to make a guide on it. I hope some of these setups come useful to you guys, but for right now, see ya.